Hi, welcome back to Nuanced Insights and More with myself, JB Nevari. I'm so excited that you are catching yet another episode on Nuanced Insights and More. Thank you so much for the love and the feedback from our first YouTube video and content that we posted. The episode on transitions that I had EP and the guest host, which was Mota. I think that was quite an incredible episode, and the engagement from you guys on the YouTube page, absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for the love. And I think that was actually the last set or the last episode on navigating transitions. But I think, if you're not satisfied, just go restart it again and then you'll be satisfied. But for now, I'm coming back, and I'm coming with a brand new series that I think is actually gonna take some time, because there's lots and lots of content that I think I want us to sit on together and just make sure that we pull out as much as we can from this subject. So the series that I'm kickstarting today, I've titled it Leadership Essentials. Leadership Essentials. And I can't tell you how many episodes are going to come out of this. But from the content that I have at this point in time and the people that I'm thinking of bringing, I can tell you it's going to be absolutely amazing. And there's going to be many people that are going to come to contribute. But I also have so many thoughts that I'm going to take my time to go over, and I'll obviously be waiting for you guys to feedback and to continue the conversation and just to build some more knowledge and language around the area of leadership. So, leadership essentials. This is the first episode, and the intention of this episode is just to really introduce the subject of leadership essentials and what I intend to do. And the coming episodes, then I'll be then pinpointing the different aspects of the conversation, and then we'll dig deep into those just to make sure that we continuously add value to your leadership journey. So leadership is a concept that is, I think it's quite common in our spaces. Everywhere we're talking about leadership. At work, we're talking about leadership. At home, we're talking about leadership. At church, we're talking about leadership. It's that one thing that is an integral aspect of our lives. We can't go a day without a display or interaction with leadership. Wherever you go, whatever you do on a day-to-day basis, you are interacting with a level of leadership at some point. So it's one of those things that we can never out talk. We can never outgrow talking about leadership. The need to want to improve the quality of leadership in our society will never go down. We will forever have to continuously talk and develop our understanding and our leadership acumen. And this series seeks to do that. Even if I know right now in the country, for example, or in the world, there are many cases of displays of poor leadership and lack of understanding of what true leadership is. And there's a deeper yearning for good and authentic and true and better leadership. But let me tell you, even if we improve where we are now and we become better, there'll always be room to talk about leadership, because it's that one thing that gets us going. So and there are many various definitions of leadership that have been communicated by many leadership um, people who speak on leadership experts, and just people who are leading at different levels in our society, and they've contributed to what we have come to think leadership as. And I'm also gonna make my contribution, but obviously on the back of the work that many other leaders have developed. I've got some leadership definitions that I think are quite interesting. Um, for example, I think one of my best leadership definitions is from the late Dr. Miles Monroe, who then says that leadership is defined as the capacity to influence others through inspiration, motivated by a passion, generated by a vision, produced by a conviction, ignited by purpose. I mean, that's a long leadership definition. But when I actually think about it, he made it super long because he was trying to cover what actually matters in leadership, and he tried to make sure that he, in that leadership definition, he characterizes vision, passion, conviction, and purpose. And you can check out his book, The Spirit of Leadership, where he really goes into detail of every part of this definition, and he just breaks down how all these concepts interface and make up the concept of leadership. But I think I also like the definition from John C. Maxwell, who simply defines leadership as influence. He actually says leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And I agree with him. There's a leadership philosopher, Warren Bennis, who also defined leadership as the capacity to translate vision into reality. I agree with that definition. There's Lisa Cash Hansen, who defined leadership as the ability to guide others without force into a direction or decisions that leaves them still feeling empowered and accomplished. And the list of definitions can go on and on and on. But I just thought these are some of the leadership definitions that I think I resonate with and I agree with. I don't think we'll ever get that one leadership definition that speaks about everything about leadership. But the more we develop the body of work around leadership, we continuously increase our understanding of what leadership is all about. I have my own take on what I think leadership is. I think, I believe that leadership is the capacity to generate an effect that causes someone or something to become better. I will be going into that definition and trying to break down really what is the thought process. Why is it a capacity? Why do we have to generate an effect? But I think the underpinning and the peculiar thought around what I think about leadership is the last part, which is that this thing must cause someone or something to be better. Ultimately, the role of leadership is that our society, our people, our systems, our organizations must really become better. But there's a golden thread around leadership. There's a word that when we talk of leadership, we cannot help but put it in there, and it's the word influence. Just like John Maxwell said, leadership is influence. That's the golden word. That's probably the closest word in our time to define and describe what leadership is influence. It's to get someone or something to do something. Just create movement that's going to cause someone to move or something to move. That's leadership, But in this series, I intend to, there are many scattered leadership principles. So many principles coming from so many different people in many different contexts. And in the leadership arena, there's just so many thoughts that it can become difficult to appropriate those thoughts. You find a principle is being uttered, and in your life, it's not yet contextual. But you want to apply it, but you can't apply it because you're not in the context at which that principle is coming from. So in this series, I'm going to be giving you some examples of some leadership principles that I think need thorough contextualization. Okay, but let me just give you an example. There's a leadership thought that says that if anyone thinks he's leading but no one is following, then he's taking a walk. I see that definition, and I agree with it, with the principle. I really agree with it. But it's not true across the board of leadership, right? Because that statement is probably true for someone who they're already out there, they're already doing something, they're trying to build an organization. The expectation is that you must have people you are influencing who follow your ideals. But if you're just starting out as a leader, you don't have a family, you don't have an organization, there's really, at that point, there's no one following you. So we can't say you're not a leader. You're a leader in your own right. So I have that idea of taking some leadership principles and contextualizing them for them to make sense. And I've actually coined what I want to call the 5 stages of leadership. I call it the 5 stages of the leadership life cycle. The 5 stages of the leadership life cycle. And I think these 5 stages of the leadership life cycle, any and every true principle of leadership will find room in either one of the 5 stages, if not all, if not 2, if not 3. Because each and every one of us are either at one of these stages in our leadership life cycle. Leadership it's sort of like it revolves. You are going from one cycle to the next, one cycle to the next, one cycle to the next, and you might be at one cycle in one area of your life and another stage in one area of your life. These are the 5 stages of the leadership life cycle. The first stage for me is the pediatrics of leadership. And right after the pediatrics of leadership, we have the juveniles of leadership. And right after the juveniles of leadership, we have the adolescence of leadership. And right after the adolescence of leadership, we have maturity and multiplication. Then the last cycle of the leadership life cycle is legacy. I'm convinced that every leadership principle that you know or you will hear, if you can try locate it in one of these stages, it will find its place. But if you are still at your adolescence, you are going to struggle with a leadership concept that applies for legacy. And I think that's where that's one of the things that we need to refine in our times, that we try to have legacy conversations when we're still juvenile. And the other frustrating thing is when someone is at maturity and legacy, but they're struggling with adolescence and juvenile stuff. And in this series, I intend to putting all those principles in their place. For example, in South Africa, there's a whole talk around the EFF and Julius Malema. There's been a talk around Julius Malema must step down. He must let other people lead the EFF. He has had his, how many terms? I forgot how many terms. But there's this almost growing pressure to say that Julius Malema is giving the signs of a dictator because he has been leading the EFF since its inception. I don't think so. I think if we are going to have that conversation outside of acknowledging the stages in the leadership life cycle, then probably he needs to step down. But if we're going to look at it from what it is in the leadership life cycle and where the organization is in its leadership life cycle, I don't think he has to go anywhere, because I don't think he's still at legacy as yet when it pertains to his organization. But I think he's still at a point where he's building the organization, and the organization is still getting its identity. The organization is still trying to grow. He needs to be there. But if you are then going to take a legacy principle and try to bring it where he is now, it's not going to be applicable, and you think he's a bad leader. And he's actually an awesome and a great leader. But that's just one of the examples of what happens when we don't have the right kind of leadership conversations at the right stage of the leadership life cycle. So let's go into the pediatrics of leadership, what the pediatrics of leadership is all about. So I think this is where your makeup of leadership needs to be sorted out. So what do you believe leadership is? What do you believe leadership is not? There are still people who think that the ticket to leadership is a title or a position. And I think that's an error that must be solved at the pediatrics level of leadership. Now, I must say this. The development of what you know leadership to be will always grow and will always be refined. But there are fundamentals that must never change. And these are the things that we must sort out at this stage of your pediatrics. Now, you as an individual, in your pediatric stage of leadership, the first thing that you must do is that you must come to a place where you come to beliefs that you hold dear on what leadership is. Principles that you hold on what is leadership and what does leadership mean to you. For me, that sits in the leadership pediatrics. So for example, leadership is influence. Servant leadership. Those are things that we should clear out in the pediatrics of leadership. Many people are waiting to get positions to identify themselves as leaders. And that's probably the last thing that you need to identify as a leader. I believe that like the basic starter pack for leadership is yourself. You need to get yourself right. So the pediatrics of leadership, let's talk about your self-awareness. Let's talk about your self-concept. Let's talk about your self-reflection. And these are things that people who are actually very advanced in organizations still struggle with. One review or one reflection or one feedback, it takes them off. Why? Because I think the pediatrics has not been sorted right. Have you ever been led by a manager who cannot take feedback? Feedback doesn't have to sit in the later in the legacy or the maturity and multiplication. It's something that needs to be sorted out in your pediatrics. Your self-concept, what do you view about yourself? What do you believe about yourself? What do you know about yourself? What do you believe is the core of yourself? What's your potential? What's your potential mapping? How do you regulate yourself? Most organizations are brought down by, you find that someone has actually built a formidable family, a formidable church, a formidable organization. And then right when they're at the top, they do something that makes the organization crumble down, and then everything just comes. And they fail. It's not that they don't have the skill. It's not that they don't have the potential. It's not that they don't have what it takes to be. They build that thing, right? But probably their self-regulation was not built properly. They didn't have the acumen to tell themselves when to stop. And for me, that's a pediatric element. That's something that we need to sort out in your pediatrics too. You need to grow your fiber, the fiber within you, that you can tell yourself that I need to stop here. Those are stuff that sits in your pediatrics. We need to go into mapping your giftings, your potentials, your callings, your vision, your abilities. These are things that need to be sorted earlier on in the pediatrics of your leadership. This is before you even have to convince someone to follow you. Because probably the first most important thing that you need in leadership is yourself. You need yourself. That's why I was then negotiating that the code of saying that if anyone thinks he's a leader and no one is following, he's taking a walk. Yeah, I see it, but it's probably not so contextual in this case. Because I believe you can be a leader even before anyone follows you. Because your self-concept is right, your self-awareness is right, your self-regulation is right, you know your potential, you are aware of your abilities, you are aware of your calling, you are aware of your passion, your gifting. You are well on your way to build up your leadership. And there's absolutely nothing missing there. And those are the things that sit in your pediatrics of leadership. And we are going to be having sessions where we'll be deep diving into this. Because you know what? I believe that as a leader, becoming better as a leader is better than making things better. Becoming better as an individual in leadership is superior than making your environment better. Ultimately, the leader must be better. I think it's one of the things Craig Rochelle says. When the leader gets better, every other person gets better. I'm a firm believer of that. So I believe in that. Let's get the leader better, and then everything around the leader will be better. Then the second stage of the leadership life cycle is what I would call the juveniles of leadership. So this is where the self elements have been sorted out. This is where the potential elements have been sorted out. This is where your mapping of what you think your contribution to your society or to your world is. Those things have been sorted out. But now you are at a stage where there are people who are beginning to identify what you have, what you do, what you can do, what your potential is, and they don't yet officially appoint you to do stuff. But there's a level of noticing that is beginning to happen around your life, where now you are now coming out of yourself. It's no longer much about yourself, but there's people who are now beginning to interact with the things that you believe around your leadership. So you have been earmarked for responsibilities. They've not been officially granted to you, but now you can be trusted with the responsibilities, because this is a layer where, over and above just the conceptual things that you believe about leadership, now there are responsibilities that you begin to take on as an individual. It's probably not yet official in an organization. It's not yet official, but you have what it takes to take on responsibilities. It's not yet official, but you can take on leadership roles. You can take on leadership responsibilities. There are functions that you believe you can take on and you can deliver on them, but you have not been given a role or a title that backs the responsibilities that you have, but you are at a state where you can actually do them. And there's a little level of accountability outside of your space where there are people who begin to hold you accountable to certain things. You have not really matured, but you are getting there. And in this state, that's where you even begin to you are developing a language around your leadership, and you are beginning to make other people begin to buy in to the individual that you are. So you are beginning to convince other people now to start following you, to start believing in the things that you believe in, to start believing in your potential, to start believing in your skill set. That's what I call the juveniles of leadership. And that's where we begin to see influence coming into the picture. You're no longer just influencing your life, but you are beginning at a very low level, beginning to influence people, beginning to influence system. And probably let's talk about this term influence. What do we mean that by influence? I believe influence is just a commodity that buys you the credibility to be listened to and to be followed. So it's influence is that commodity that buys you being listened to and being followed. So at the juveniles of leadership, that's where your influence is beginning to show. You've not been put on a pedestal to say, this is JB, this is what is responsible for, this is what it does. But from how I administrate myself and my giftings and what I do, there are people who are beginning to identify that, oh, there's actually something peculiar here. But they don't officiate or they don't make it official what I have. And there's stuff that we need to get right. In this stage, let's probably get your communication right. Because you're beginning to communicate to your environment. You're beginning to communicate to your people. And you're doing that outside of titles, outside of roles, outside of officiated responsibilities. But you are coming in as an individual who has what it takes to assume those responsibilities. Now, your communication as to how you communicate your ideals, how you communicate your convictions, how you communicate yourself to, it's not necessarily a PR exercise, but how you communicate yourself to your outside world becomes absolutely, absolutely important in the juvenile stage. Communication is extremely important because I think it's John Maxwell, one of the things he says about communication is he says bad communication is like a guy trying to wink on a girl in a dark room. Like in accurate communication, it's like a guy in a dark room and is trying to wink to a girl, but the room is dark. Yes, you are doing, you are communicating, but you're in a dark room. It's not landing. So if you don't get your communication right, you might have gotten your things proper there in pediatrics, but if your communication is wrong, you will not be able to communicate them across to your system, to your environment, to people who then need to buy you in and usher you into the next level of your leadership. And that's what I think is extremely important in the juvenile. In the juvenile stage of the leadership life cycle, we're probably beginning to craft our value frameworks and our character frameworks. So this is where we're beginning to firmly craft what we believe in, what we will do, and what we will not do. Because leadership is the power of leadership is not only displayed in what people do, it's also displayed in what people choose not to do. So the power of leadership is not only in the attack, it's also in the restraint. Because many organizations have fallen on the back of people who can do stuff, but they don't have it in them to stop themselves from not doing certain stuff. Because many organizations are brought down. You find someone has built an organization, it's a multinational, but then there's something they fail to stop themselves from doing. And then they just kill everything that they've built. So in the juveniles of leadership, that's where we're supposed to map out your value frameworks. What is it that you believe? What is it that you don't believe? What is it that you know you're going to do? What is it that you are firmly not going to do? These are stuff that we must sort out in your value frameworks. Because when you begin to graduate from the juveniles of leadership, you will go into spaces that are so powerful and they will propose that you do certain stuff. But it's that crafted value framework that will say, I do not do this. I actually have terrible examples of what lack of restraint means in leadership. I think that's the stuff that we need to sort out in the juveniles of leadership. The next stage is what I'll call the adolescence of leadership. The adolescence of leadership, there's some maturity that's beginning to take place. There's some official roles and responsibilities that are beginning to come to your space. So, what is then absolutely important in the adolescence of leadership is that we need to then begin to build strong competence base. So, your competence base needs to be extremely strong. Why? Because you are probably becoming more official. You're becoming more official. The trust that people have bought into you now. Now it's a function of your potential. It's not your potential now that is enough. Your potential is no longer enough at this point. People have bought in. Now you need to come in competent. Your curiosity is no longer enough. You need to come in competent. So around your adolescence of leadership, this is where now we need to make sure that you can actually deliver. You can actually live up to the tasks that are being officially designated to you. You can actually show up extremely responsible. And so there's a whole body of work that we need to look into to say, how do we get you to become a strongly competent person? Because on the adolescence of leadership, this is where people and systems and organizations will begin to trust you. Their trust is on you now as the individual. They can put responsibilities on you because they trust that you can deliver. So if we don't get your competence right, you will short circuit the trust that people have given to you, and you will under deliver, and you will just disappoint everyone. So this is where much of the work that should have been done on the pediatrics and juvenile stage of leadership must be intact, because feedback is going to be a thing that comes with weight. The stakes are high. The stakes are become real. We don't just only work on people buying into us because we've got potential. Now our potential must be actuated. And this is what is happening in the adolescence of leadership. Another one last thing around the adolescence of leadership is probably this, where you then begin to learn how to lead up. You begin to learn how to lead up. The leading up conversation is probably not contextual when we're in this legacy stage of the leadership cycle, because there you've got power. It's probably not relevant when you're in the pediatrics of leadership because you're still trying to get the basics right. I think here in the adolescence of leadership, that's where you begin to learn the tactics of what it means to lead the people that are above you and to lead the systems that are building you up. Then the next stage of the leadership life cycle is what I call maturity and multiplication. So this is where sayings such as positions don't matter in leadership are probably not so true. In this stage of leadership, positions matter. So why do I say positions matter? Your power must be safeguarded. Your power must be protected. These are stages where you not only have one individual seeking to sponsor a cause. You have a list of individuals who have a cause that they want to sponsor. You have people who have ideals that they want to push forward. And there must be a unique cause about your life, right? So this is where positions must come to protect what you want to advance. So in this stage of leadership, we can't tell you that positions don't matter. No, in this stage, positions matter. And your power and your influence must be safeguarded by some level of positions, but by some level of officiated delegated responsibility to say, JB is responsible for this. So no one is wrong when they expect you to do something. You are at a matured state of leadership and you are expected to be making things better. You're supposed to be making things grow. This is where probably the conversation on leadership versus management becomes extremely important, because as opposed to just making sure the status quo remains, but you also need to make sure that things continuously become better. And that's where the tension of leadership and management finds its space. Both are equally important. Management is important, and management is a part of leadership. And this is where that conversation of leadership and management, I think, then finds room. There's a lot of politics in around this stage. The leadership here is very outcome based. This is where you must actually deliver. You need to be, if you're leading a team of numbers, you must deliver the numbers. And that's where you actually then now start learning how to coach the people that are down the leadership ladder. So the people in your pediatrics and juvenile, you begin to learn to coach other people. The coaching debate, I don't think is relevant when you are in pediatrics. What are you going to coach? Because you're still trying to get self-awareness right. We shouldn't be talking coaching when you're starting out. But at this stage of leadership, the maturity and multiplication, that's when the coaching conversation begins to find expression. Then the last stage for leadership, the leadership life cycle, is legacy. So this is when you've been accomplished. This is when you've got stats behind your back. You've got achievements. You are who's who. You've built whatever you've built. You are the individual that you've always intended, you've always wanted to become. Now, the big conversation around this is to say, how then do you take whatever you built and give it as a start up for the next generation? That's the legacy stage. And that's where I think people are saying the EFF and Malema is that he's not yet there. He's still building up his organization. But we're saying he must step down. No, he must not step down. He's not yet at legacy. When he arrives at legacy, we will know this guy has arrived at legacy. And he will then hand over. Now this episode is like about Malema. Then he will hand over the organization because it's at a legacy state. This is where you begin to learn how to mentor, how to pass down knowledge, how to pass down skills, how to pass down convictions, how to pass down generational missions. This is when you are at the legacy state. But this is what one important thing about the leadership life cycle. You can go through the whole leadership life cycle in a particular area of your life, even when you're still young. So you can be young, but you find yourself at the legacy state of leadership in a particular area of your life. So for example, I led an organization when I was in university. The highest point of me leading that organization was that I was the chairperson of the organization. And eventually when I was leaving, I had to make sure that the guys that were coming after us had been well trained. Quite honestly, I had reached the legacy state of my leadership in that context. So I'm saying this to move you away from thinking that you have to be 60 to be in legacy. No, it's a life cycle. So around your family, around your organization, around whatever you're trying to do, you go through the leadership life cycle, and every conversation around leadership then becomes contextual. In the coming episodes, I'll be continuing to break down what sits in the different stages of the leadership life cycle. Then I'll bring in some more people to have this conversation. I hope you enjoyed this conversation and you'll be tuned in for upcoming conversations on the Leadership Essential series. For now, I'm out. Boom. Please be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel, Nuanced Insights and More, and click on the notification bell so that you can get notified when I upload new content.